Hey everyone, this is Mario again, coming at you with another movie review. Today I'm reviewing the sequel to a movie I reviewed a couple days ago. It is a sequel that a couple parts during the movie feels kind of like a retread of the original, but it's one of those retread type sequels that is still enjoyable. And I'm of course talking about Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. As you can tell, my VHS cover is a little worn, but the tapes are still in very good condition. And of course, I don't plan on getting the DVD or Blu-ray anytime soon because they're basically bare bones. Logic would denote if you do it for the original and the sequel is still a hit, wouldn't you do it for the sequel? I mean, you could have had Columbus and Culkin do it, at least a commentary. You could have gotten them back and talk about how it was setting the sequel in New York. There's plenty of documentary material there. Granted, now they wouldn't be able to have John Hughes stuff unless it was stuff from back in the day. You know, that's one thing I forgot to mention in the first review. John Hughes is no longer with us, but he has a legacy of great films like this one they'll leave with him. Now, like I just said, it's once again written by John Hughes, and Chris Columbus returns to direct. And of course, the cast from the first film return. Macaulay Culkin as Kevin McCallister, Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern as Harry and Marv, John Hurd and Catherine O'Hara as Kevin's parents. And of course, we got Tim Curry in a role as, I'm looking for his character's name. Mr. Hector's his name? I didn't know that. Anyway, he plays the manager of the Plaza Hotel, and he is a dick. I'll get to him later. Let's see who else is. Rob Schneider has a small role as a bellboy named Cedric, which he doesn't really bother me. I mean, it's a small role, and usually he can be annoying sometimes in films, but here he's not annoying. Then we got Brenda Fricker as this bird lady, which that's one of the few things that's kind of a retread that kind of isn't necessary, which I will get to later. Now, the plot of the movie is that it takes place about a year after the first movie, and because of Buzz, once again, Kevin is in the doghouse. As the first movie, he gets Kevin to start a fight because of the pizza. This time, now this one, I will admit this scene is funny. It's one of my favorite gags in the movie. It's Kevin and Buzz are in the school choir, I'm guessing. They never really explain the whole thing behind the Christmas pageant. But Kevin has a solo during it. And during it, Buzz is standing directly behind him. He takes the candles and starts messing him, like doing things like... My favorite one is the last thing he does. He's like using Kevin like a... I mean, the only family member that laughs at it is Uncle Frank, which just shows how much of a dick he is, but it's just funny. And then, of course, Kevin punches him, and he gets in trouble. And then, because he won't apologize because of Buzz faking his apology, he gets sent to the third floor. But if it was my kid, I probably would have investigated a little bit further. And there's one thing I want to ask. What is a trout sniffer? That's the name that Buzz says to Kevin. He's like, beat that, you little trout sniffer. What is a trout sniffer? Is he someone that... Is it a literal insult? Is it someone that takes a trout and sniffs it? Well, is it a job down at the fishery? Yeah, we gotta make sure this trout is fresh. Bring in the trout sniffer. They have a highly trained nose. Fresh. Fresh. No. Throw that. Give it to the bears. Hey, boo-boo! Look at this fish. I don't think that fish is fresh, Yogi. Boo-boo! You worry too much. Remember, I'm smarter than the average bear. Or does the insult trout sniffer have another thing with it? Is it porn talk? Could be. And if so, if it's an insult, it might not be a good thing. Like, I don't think you'd call Ron Jeremy a trout sniffer. Well, you could, but then he'd kick your ass. Or he'd do to you what he did to the guy in the date rape music video. You guys know what I'm talking about with that. But, anyway, back to the plot. Kevin, doghouse again, like I said. And of course, this is probably one of the retread things that, as I get older, doesn't work anymore. It's, they sleep in again. As a kid, you're like, as you get older, you're like, whoopity-doo. It's because this one is no excuse, because it's John Hurt's own fault, which I don't want to spoil how it's his fault, but if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. And then, of course, they wake up, we did it again! Ah! But because of it, we get a good line from Frank. I'm not going to complain about a free trip, but geez, you guys give the worst guard-dong wake-up calls. Which 2 years in a row, yeah, which... That's another thing about the movie's supposed to take place a year after the first one, but from the look of Kevin, you could tell that it was made 2 years later, which I think they should have said it 2 years later. They never really say it's 2 years later in the movie, but from little pieces of dialogue, you guess it. But I would like to say it's probably more like 2 years later, because after what they did in the first film, don't you think you'd take a year off before you decide to go anywhere else for Christmas? I mean... And one of the deleted scenes with Harry and Marv that I forgot to mention in the previous video, they actually talk about that. Like Harry's like, yeah, it used to be times when people just stayed home for Christmas. Then the end of the scene, so which house do you want to hit first, Harry? Stuff like that. But back to the film. And there's a nice little gag about, where's Kevin? And of course, at this time they actually make it to the airport and Kevin gets separated from them because he has to get batteries for his... I forget what it's called, hold on. I think it's Talk Boy. Checking. Yeah, Talk Boy. Which, from what I hear, those don't work in real life like they do in the movie, but they were made afterwards. It was only supposed to be something for in the movie, but then high demand when this VHS came out, made for. Which, I never had one, but I do love those commercials. Hi kids, we're home early. You sound like James Earl Jones when he's high on speed. Not something. That would be funny, Darth Vader high on speed. How do you do that? It's like, well, what would be like a scene like in Spaceballs, only with Darth Vader. Lord Vader, what is it? Can't you see I'm busy? Like that. Yeah, that's just a funny thought, Darth Vader doing cocaine. How would he do it, though? How would he sniff it up through the helmet, but still. And because of the separation, he follows the wrong person who's wearing the same coat as his dad, and he ends up in New York. Now, of course, just like the first movie, he's excited at first, and he actually goes on a little bit of a shopping spree because he has his dad's wallet, because he had his dad's bag looking for the batteries. And of course, he checks into the Plaza Hotel. Now, at the same time, the Wet Bandits have escaped, and they never say how they escaped from prison. It's a very vague explanation. They escaped during a prison riot, which I think Hughes couldn't think of an actual way for them to escape, so he's like, leave it to your imagination, which I think works in a way. During a prison riot, so much stuff could happen during a prison riot, so it's up to the individual viewer's interpretation of how they escaped. I don't know how they escaped, I just don't like to think of one that's probably a little bit stronger. And they end up in New York. And, of course, you can guess when they find out Kevin's there, they want to kill him. Just like I mentioned in the first review. In the first film, you know they at least want to maim him, but by the end they probably want to kill him. This one, straight out, they want to kill him. I mean, Harry has a gun, which you can guess if he gets caught again, that's not going to be good. He's already a convicted felon, so he can't own a gun, so it's an illegal possession of a firearm. And... oh yeah, almost lost my train of thought for a second, but while Kevin's at the hotel, that's where we have Tim Curry as the villain of the piece. He's like a minor antagonist, but I wouldn't really call him an antagonist. I wouldn't call him an anti-hero either. It's kind of hard to label him as something. Actually, antagonist, now I think of it, actually antagonist sounds better, but he's the other one. And he
walks in. Granted, it is suspicious. He's the only one that keeps that suspicion, but the story Kevin gives is a valid story, so I wouldn't think of anything to suspect of it. Because it makes sense, but then again, like when the parents complain later, what kind of idiots do you have working here? The finest in New York. Yeah. Now, of course, like there are jokes that are similar to jokes in the first movie. Like we have a joke, reminiscent of the Angels with Filthy Souls joke from the first movie. But there's two different ones. There's one involving the sequel, Angels with Even Filthier Souls, which is the Christmas-based gag to the movie. Merry Christmas, you filthy animal, and a Happy New Year. I just love that, especially since when watching Kevin watch the movie's funny. I was singing at the Blue Monkey last night. No, she wasn't. She was smooching with your brother. You was here, and you was smooching with my brother. That's a dirty, rotten lie, Johnny, see? And then near the end of it, she's rat bait. There's stuff like that.
Now, the first one that it involved doesn't involve that. It's the infamous shower scene, which I just love the look on Tim Curry's face at the end when the prank is played on him. He's like, "Get out of here, you nosy little pervert! I'm gonna slap you silly." Oh! And then when he runs and bangs his knee, I wonder if that bang, if him tripping over that little stool was intentional, or if that was an ad lib by mistake. If that was an ad lib, that was a good one. Akin to when Ian McKellen hits his head on the Hobbit whole roof in Fellowship of the Ring, how he just goes through it and it adds the comedy of the scene. Lubricating my mouth a little bit with some delicious Powerade Zero. Yes, this is my product placement moment. Don't drink too much of them in one day, though. It'll make your pee smell like Kool-Aid. I know that. Personally, it happened, but it wasn't this flavor. It was orange flavor. Now, back on track. Like I mentioned earlier, the bird lady. That is the one thing that is similar to something in the first film I could do without. The first film, it's kind of touching because Kevin is 8 years old. He's never met something like this. His brother told him the story. Marley does look like a creepy guy that looks like he probably could kill someone still. And also those little hints, like that little look he gives Kevin, like, doesn't help anything, but then he finds out he was wrong. Two reasons why, in retrospect, the bird lady one could have been left out. One, from what he learned from Marley, he should have learned not to judge a person by their looks alone. Granted, the first time he sees the bird lady, he just says sick because of all the birds. Because, you know, pigeon poop, you know, it has a bunch of diseases in it. So that would probably be my first reaction, like, sick. But you know, she must love the birds. Feed the birds. Mary Poppins reference. I can't help it. I had to do that. I don't remember all the song, but the metal version of that. Feed the bird. Death metal version. Feed the birds. But Death Clock doing it. Feed the birds or we'll eat your soul. Now, the second part, though, you know, I could see that is where it's like, why is he screaming? Didn't he learn last year or 2 years ago, wherever the first movie was supposed to take place, not to judge a person by their looks? Jeez. Granted, he warms up to her faster than he does to Marley, so maybe he remembered. Of course, it's only set up. They have to have her, because you have to have someone to help Kevin with how they do the ending. They could have done something different, like maybe he outsmarted them and didn't get caught this time. That would have been nice, have him outsmart them, like have a little thing ready for them in the park at the end, if you've seen the movie. That would have been cool, but it sets up for one of the funniest parts of the movie with the pigeons, which I'm not going to say anything about. Now, once Kevin is going up against the burglars, you get to probably one of my favorite parts of the movie. It's slapstick like in the first one, and it's one of the things, just like with the first one, that critics bash. Like, here's what Ebert said. Cartoon violence is only funny in cartoons. Most of the live-action attempts to duplicate animation have failed because when flesh and blood figures hit the pavement, we can almost hear the bones crunch and it isn't funny. If it isn't funny, how come I'm laughing? If people laugh at it, I don't think it isn't... I think it's funny if people are laughing at it. But then, of course, Ebert's one of those guys that everything has to be highbrow. Or at least most things have to be highbrow. They all have to have a meaning. Not all movies have to have a meaning. I mean, it's not like we're lit with literature where some things have to have a meaning, because, granted, I know there are, like, action movie equivalents of novels, but I've never read any, so I don't know how they are. But most novels I've read usually have a meaning or something subtly or in your face, but they usually work. With movies, there are movies that can have a message and be subtle that work, like Rambo 1 and Rambo 2. You know, their message, the first one, of course, being that war is hell, basically, and we shouldn't treat the veterans bad. And the second one, same message in a different way. And then, of course, this movie is mostly for entertainment, but it does have a kind of a message. How to work that message, I guess. Family's important, I guess, kind of the same message as the first one. And of course, along with the bird lady, don't judge a person by appearances. That's basically all I can think of that the message, if there's any moral to the story, off the top of my head. But the slapstick is for comedy, and like I mentioned with the first one, and Mike also mentioned this in his review of the first one. I don't remember if he mentioned it in the second one, but these are burglars, and in this one they actually want to kill Kevin. So him using the methods he does is justifiable, and it makes for some funny moments. Like when Marv gets shot in the crotch with the stapler gun. It's funnier when he gets shot in the butt, though, because it's the first staple. Then of course when the flower hits him in the head, but some of them might be a little over the top, like when Harry gets hit in the head with the wrenches, but it's still funny because he calls Kevin on his traps. You gotta do better than this, kid. Kick. I know in the trailer he doesn't fall from all the wrenches, which is funnier if he does fall. But the funniest is when they recreate the head on fire gag, but they even acknowledge that they're redoing it because Harry is actually aware of it, but how they up it is very great. But the problem, one thing they could have done with the ending, though, is how they recreate the ending of the original film, kind of, someone yell at Kevin. It would have been better to end it the way it looked like it was going to end. Now, I don't know what else to say about this movie. Like, it's an enjoyable sequel. Like I mentioned before, at times it is like a rehash of the first movie, but it's one of those ones that's very enjoyable to at least most people will like. I mean, I know I'm one of the few people in our little group of friends that likes Predators, but like I said, like I've mentioned a couple times before, I have to give it a second watch, see if I still enjoy it the second time around, but that one is more closer to the original one than this one is, because this one actually feels like a sequel. It doesn't feel like a reboot/remake that's supposed to be a sequel. That's partially because of the new setting, because if they had done this at home, it probably wouldn't have worked as well. Putting it in a new setting kind of makes the film work. And that's why I'm glad. I wouldn't say glad, actually, because they haven't done another sequel that's truly a sequel with the Kevin character. But if they did, I actually would have liked to have seen them do it creatively. But how could you have top him being lost in New York? I think that's why Hughes with the next one went to a different kid, Home Alone, which I actually did see that movie in theaters, by the way, but I haven't seen it in years, so I don't know if it's aged well. I know that the fourth one hasn't aged well, except for me liking the actor that played the butler. Anyway, my rating of Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, is 4.5 out of 5. Half a point down, but that's partially due to the rehash and that bird lady thing. But other than that, like I said, it's an enjoyable sequel. If you are a fan of the first movie and you haven't seen this one, which I don't know why you wouldn't have, because it's almost next year, actually, it's going to be 20 years since this movie came out. Then you should see it. Which, by the way, I actually did see where they actually filmed the brick scene in this movie. They filmed it at Universal Studios, and you actually could see it on the tour. I don't know if they mention it anymore, the backlot tour. They mention it. And right there is where Macaulay Culkin threw bricks at Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci in Home Alone 2. I'm like, oh yeah, that is that spot. Cool. Of course, that was back when the original King Kong thing was there, which that thing was cool. I haven't been to Universal Studios since then, obviously, but that was a fun trip.